as clear as mud. People have been noticing a change in the weather, and some oddly dramatic clouds, rain, winds and hailstorms have been popping up here and there across the world, making quite the impact too on all the green and renewable energy installations around the world, mentioned in An Elemental Shift. A recent mud hailstorm occurred in Arkansas, looking like bricks raining from the sky, which made me think of other times where unusual weather has been noted, recently and in times past. 1902, it rained mud in the UK and Tasmania, and Australia had what they called a remarkable meteorological event, in which they say an extraordinary red dust storm accompanied by falling fireballs occurred. 1957, Kerala, India. They had their first blood rain event. Although speculated as dust, it was settled upon that it was in fact algae that was causing it, and the subsequent one that happened in 2001. 1859, Carrington event. The most intense geomagnetic storm in recorded history, causing auroras all over the world and extensive damage to telegraphs by way of sparks and fires. They say a comparable event today would cause huge disruption to communication, electrical systems, internet and general blackouts. 1862, the Great Flood, USA. The Great Flood of 1862 was the largest flood in the recorded history of California, Oregon and Nevada, inundating the western United States and portions of British Columbia and Mexico. The damage from that was catastrophic, with large death toll, a quarter of the cattle gone, massive costs for rebuild, towns destroyed and roads impassable or gone. I guess the very recent storms and flooding in North Carolina would be comparable here, as they seem to have suffered devastating losses and the toll is still rising, of deaths and cost to the ones who remain. There are also many incidents of fish and frogs falling from the sky. I'm not sure I believe the explanation that they get pulled up into storms and then travel in the clouds to then fall as rain in the next place. That would mean that clouds are dense enough to actually hold them and contain enough oxygen and water to keep them alive until the drop zone. But you never know. Mud flood. There is much talk within the Tartarian circles of there being a massive mud flood in our recent past. And if you look at the reasoning, it's not far-fetched at all, with multiple cases across multiple countries of there being clear signs of full houses, windows and doorways buried just beneath our feet, and that many of our modern cities and towns are built on top of the previous layer, except in some places where it seems the buildings were far too special to just leave hidden, and they are the ones that are founded, and across the board have a similar appearance, of that classical style that everybody seems so capable of building in the 1800s. Clearly with the artisan skilled army, huge resources and materials to travel and build. Or rather found, it seems. And seems more reasonable to believe the skills of the time were to dig and find things for your paymaster, like in the gold rush. A different crafty way to get people to volunteer to go somewhere, to make your future and fortune. However, the people who encouraged that just needed cheap and willing labour, people to dig the riches for them and trade it in for that currency they wanted everyone on. Knowing a fool and his money are soon parted, and within time companies owned all the mines, so if there was still opportunity, they controlled the monopoly on it. The newly dug riches making its way into the reserves and out of the hands of the people. The rush ran out when the companies closed it down, and they were stuck there, now tied to the system. Liquefaction. While thinking about how the mud flood could have occurred, I decided liquefaction could be an option, because while wondering on storms, rain and an eventual deluge, something didn't quite fit. The lack of mud. Now, you could say that such an extensive amount of rain could indeed cause mud on a scale we haven't seen before, like when a mudslide happens, or I guess a lahar that you get on a volcano after eruption in some cases, as with Mount St Helens in 1980, but on a much larger scale could in theory be possible, but doesn't really explain where all the extra mud came from or how it covered so much, and why it buried everything so neatly, all upright and intact. Because really, you would expect things to be topsy-turvy underfoot if buried under a violent and destructive path of mud and water, or if the ground liquefied, you would expect it to lean or have collapsed, like subsidence causes today with buildings. But much of the past is buried beneath our feet, Old buildings used as new foundations, old streets and towns covered over and forgotten while the new takes over on the surface. And they don't always get filled in and lost to memory. Edinburgh has a vast underground city still, mostly on show to tourists, but that's just the bit you can see. I suspect there are all sorts of sub-societies that have been dwelling for a number of lifetimes now, across the whole world, finding a different way of surviving, or an older way perhaps. And we have caves, catacombs, ancient sites, and architecture from all sorts of ages and eras, alongside each other, underneath and over, intermingled and reimagined. So I can understand why it's not an easy task to unpick exactly what has happened, where it happened, how it happened, and what then happened thereafter. But that won't stop me trying,